At Christmas, my mom looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not in the will anymore." That one sentence changed everything, but the gift I gave her in return changed even more. Stay with me while I walk you through what happened, because it's a story I never thought I'd tell. It was Christmas Eve in Charlotte, North Carolina. The whole house smelled like baked ham, cinnamon candles, and collard greens. The Whitaker family gathered around the long dining table, dressed in their Sunday best. Laughter floated through the air, clinking glasses, forks scraping plates. To anyone on the outside, it looked like a warm, perfect holiday gathering. But inside, I sat there with my heart pounding, sensing something was about to shift. I'm Naomi Whitaker, 28 years old, a nurse who works long shifts at the hospital. People call me quiet, but I like to think of myself as steady. I never thought I'd be the one humiliated by my own mother in front of everyone we loved. But that night, I learned how cruel family can be. My mother, Claudette Whitaker, sat at the head of the table like a queen on her throne. She wore her pearl necklace, her hair pinned just the way she liked, and her sharp eyes scanning the room. At her side was my younger brother Marcus, only 26 but already treated like the golden child. Claudette's voice carried power, and when she spoke, the whole table listened. We were halfway through dinner when she cleared her throat. I thought she was about to make a toast or say something sweet about family. Instead, she looked straight at me, her lips curling into a small smile that never reached her eyes. "Naomi," she said, "I want you to know you're not in my will anymore." The room went silent. Forks froze midair. I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me, some wide in shock, others quickly darting away. My Aunt Lorraine coughed softly, trying to break the tension, but it didn't help. The words hung heavy in the air, pressing down on my chest. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her right. My own mother, on Christmas, announcing to the entire family that she had cut me out of her will. I felt my throat tighten, heat rushing to my face. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely there. Claudette didn't flinch. "You're independent. You don't need it. Marcus will take care of things from here." She lifted her wine glass as if that settled it, as if she hadn't just shattered me in front of everyone. Marcus smirked, clearly pleased. A few relatives shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, but no one said anything. I looked around the table, hoping someone would defend me, but all I saw were lowered eyes and silence. I swallowed hard, forcing back tears. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor. My chest ached, not from losing the inheritance, but from the coldness in her voice, as if I didn't matter at all. That night, surrounded by holiday lights and family chatter, I realized Christmas had just become the darkest day of my life. Marcus Whitaker had always been the center of my mother's world. At 26, he acted like life was one long vacation. He never held a steady job for more than a few months, but Claudette always praised him like he was destined for greatness. He sat beside her at the Christmas table, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin, almost glowing in the attention she gave him. "This house, my jewelry, even the savings I've tucked away," my mother said proudly, her voice carrying across the table. "All of it will go to Marcus. He'll know how to take care of it." She patted his hand like he had already proven himself, like he had earned everything she was naming. I felt my stomach twist. My fork lay untouched on my plate as the words hit me again and again. My mother had not only cut me out, she was now painting Marcus as the one who deserved it all. And no one challenged her. Not a single person spoke up to question how fair this was. Across the table, Aunt Lorraine's eyes met mine. She was Claudette's older sister, softer in tone, with a way of showing kindness without even speaking. She gave me a look, the kind that tried to say, "I see you. I know this isn't right." Later, she leaned closer and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Naomi. You don't deserve this." Her words were the only warmth I felt that evening. The rest of the family, though, avoided my gaze. Some shifted uncomfortably, others pretended to stay focused on their plates, acting as if nothing had happened. Their silence cut deeper than my mother's words. It was easier for them to ignore my humiliation than to acknowledge it. My mind drifted back over the years, memories bubbling up like wounds reopening. When Marcus was out of work for nearly a year, who helped pay the bills? Me. I picked up double shifts at the hospital, sometimes working 16 hours, just to keep the lights on in my mother's house. When Claudette had her health scare 2 winters ago, who sat by her side at every appointment, driving her back and forth after surgery. Me. Marcus was nowhere to be found. Yet now he was the one being rewarded, handed the house, the jewelry, the savings. I thought about the times I skipped vacations, the times I swallowed my own exhaustion because my family needed me. And every single time I had shown up. But here I was, treated like a stranger, cut out as though I had never sacrificed anything at all. The shame burned in my chest, but under that shame, something darker began to grow. It wasn't just sadness anymore, it was anger. Quiet, steady anger. I could feel it building inside me as I sat there, forcing a polite smile while my brother basked in the glow of undeserved praise. That was the moment I realized, this wasn't just about losing a will. It was about being erased. And I wasn't going to let that stand forever. Sitting at that dinner table, I couldn't help but drift back to the past. The sting of my mother's words wasn't just about Christmas night. It was a reminder of how things had always been. Growing up, it was clear to anyone who paid attention. Marcus was the favorite. He got the bigger slice of cake, the newest clothes, the easier chores. When he wanted something, Claudette made it happen. When I wanted something, I was told to figure it out myself. I remembered the day I got accepted into college. I was so proud, clutching that letter in my hand, ready to share the news. My mother barely looked at it. "Good," she said flatly. "I hope you can afford it." And I did afford it, by working long hours, taking on student loans, sometimes eating ramen for weeks just to pay for books. Meanwhile, when Marcus decided to go to school, Claudette paid his tuition without hesitation. She bragged about it too, telling everyone how proud she was to invest in her son's future. I sat in silence every time she said it, swallowing the bitterness like medicine I never wanted to take. There was one memory that never left me. I was maybe 19, coming home after a long shift from my part-time job at the diner. I found Claudette in the kitchen, arms crossed, her voice sharp. "Naomi, you're too independent for your own good. You don't need family money. You always think you can do everything alone." She said it like independence was something to be ashamed of. Like the fact that I carried my own weight made me less worthy of love. The truth was, my independence wasn't a choice. It was survival. I had to learn to stand on my own because if I didn't, no one was going to hold me up. Not her, at least. But there had been one person who always did, my dad. He was the only one who saw me, who told me I mattered. I could still hear his voice sometimes, soft and steady, saying, "Naomi, you deserve everything good in this world. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He had been my anchor, my safe place. And maybe that's why my mother resented me so much. Because when the fights happened, and they always did, I stood with him. I defended him. Claudette never forgave me for that. Now, looking at her across the table, I understood something I hadn't admitted to myself before. This betrayal wasn't sudden. It wasn't just about a will. It was years in the making. Every slight, every dismissal, every time she chose Marcus over me had led here. Cutting me out was only the final act in a play that had been running since childhood. And as painful as it was to realize, a part of me finally understood. My mother had never really seen me as her daughter. Not the way a mother should. I didn't say a word after my mother's announcement. I pushed back my chair slowly, excused myself as politely as I could, and walked out of that house. Nobody stopped me. Nobody called after me. To them, I must have looked broken, defeated, like the forgotten daughter who had finally been crushed under her mother's cruelty. Maybe that's exactly what they wanted to believe. The night air hit my face as I stepped outside, cold and sharp, almost like it was trying to wake me up. My hands shook as I unlocked my car, and the moment I shut the door behind me, the tears came. They streamed down my face faster than I could wipe them away. I sobbed until my chest ached, the kind of crying that empties you out and leaves you raw. All I could hear was my mother's voice echoing in my head. "You're not in my will anymore." The drive home was a blur of streetlights and wet eyes. Every few minutes, I thought about turning the car around, storming back inside, and demanding answers. But something in me stopped. I realized yelling at her wouldn't change anything. Claudette had made her choice. She wanted Marcus to have everything, and she wanted me to feel small. But if she thought I would just accept it, she didn't know me at all. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my tears had dried. What replaced them wasn't peace, but a strange, steady calm. The kind that comes when pain hardens into resolve. I sat in the car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, and I started thinking. Not about what I had lost, but about what I still had. That's when a memory slipped in, one I hadn't thought about in years. My dad, just a few months before he passed, had pulled me aside. His voice had been weak, but his eyes still carried that warmth I always trusted. He told me he had set something aside for me privately. Something my mother didn't know about. At the time, I was too heartbroken to press for details. I tucked the memory away, buried under grief. But now, in the silence of my car, it came back sharp and clear. Could it be true? Had he really left me something? I remembered a set of documents, sealed in an envelope, handed to me by his lawyer years ago. I had never looked too closely, never had the strength. Suddenly, that envelope felt heavier in my mind than ever before. For the first time that night, I felt a flicker of something other than pain. It was small, like the flame of a match, but it was enough. If my father had trusted me with something, it meant he believed in me. It meant I still had power, even if my mother thought she had stripped it all away. As I walked into my quiet apartment, I knew one thing for certain. This story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The plan hadn't taken shape yet, but the spark had been lit. And deep down, I was ready to see it burn. The next week, I made an appointment with Mr. Harris, my father's old lawyer. He was a kind man in his late 60s, with gray hair, round glasses, and the sort of calm voice that made you feel safe. I hadn't seen him in years, not since the days right after my father passed. When I stepped into his office, it smelled faintly of old books and leather, like nothing had changed since then. He looked up from his desk, his eyes softening when he saw me. "Naomi," he said, standing to shake my hand. "It's been a long time. I wondered when you might come back." I sat down, nerves buzzing in my stomach. "Mr. Harris," I began, I think my father left something for me. Something private. I remember him saying it, but I never really followed up. He gave me a knowing smile, like he had been waiting for this moment. "Your father was very deliberate, Naomi. He trusted you in ways your mother may never understand." He opened a locked drawer, pulled out a thick envelope with my name written on it, and slid it across the desk. My breath caught. With careful hands, I opened it. Inside were several papers, deeds, records, official signatures. My eyes scanned the words, and then I froze. The documents showed ownership of a piece of property in South Carolina. An old family cabin, one I remembered visiting as a little girl. It wasn't much back then, a quiet, weathered place near the woods. But it was mine. My father had left it to me alone. I looked up at Mr. Harris in disbelief. "She doesn't know about this, does she?" I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. He shook his head slowly. "No, Claudette always assumed she controlled everything. But your father made sure this cabin went to you directly. It bypassed her completely. She can't touch it." The words hit me like a wave. For so long, I had felt powerless, like my mother had taken away every piece of my worth. But here it was, proof that my father believed in me enough to entrust me with something of my own. Something she could never take. I sat there holding the deed, my fingers trembling slightly. All the anger, all the humiliation from Christmas night suddenly began to shift into something else. I realized I had more power than I ever thought possible. This wasn't just a piece of land. It was leverage. It was dignity. And maybe, if I played it right, it could be the perfect way to turn everything back on my mother. By the time I left Mr. Harris's office, the winter sun was setting over Charlotte. The sky glowed with streaks of orange and purple, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. I clutched the documents tightly to my chest, a quiet smile forming on my lips. This cabin wasn't just an inheritance. It was the key, and I knew exactly who I was going to use it against. I spent the next year like someone building a secret. I told hardly anyone where I was going or what I was doing. I booked time off work in chunks, drove down to South Carolina on weekends, and quietly set to work on the cabin my father left me. I didn't want it polished and pretty for the world. I wanted it powerful, like a trap you only see once it snaps shut. First, I hired a small crew I trusted. I chose people who would follow instructions and keep their mouths shut. A carpenter who could match old wood with new, an electrician who rewired without needing to advertise, and a landscaper who could make overgrown brush look intentionally wild. We fixed the roof, replaced rotten joists, and installed modern plumbing and insulation. Inside, we added new hardwood floors under the old carpet, replaced the dated kitchen with a simple, effective design, and upgraded the bathroom so it looked like it belonged in a nicer neighborhood. None of it screamed luxury. It whispered it in places Claudette wouldn't notice at a glance. Outside, I left the porch sagging just enough to look neglected. I kept a few rusted tools and old chairs stacked in a corner. From the road, the cabin appeared like the same cheap retreat my mother remembered, a weathered shack tucked behind trees. I wanted people who saw it head-on to think it meant nothing. I wanted Claudette to shrug when I mentioned it, to laugh it off as a sentimental relic. But behind that front, I quietly secured value. I paid for a full professional appraisal and had legal teams clear any title issues. I invested in small but high-value improvements that appraisers prize. Updated wiring to code, foundation reinforcement, and a septic system replaced with a modern one. I documented every penny. Receipts, contractor agreements, permits, and inspection reports filled a folder I labeled simply cabin documents. I opened a bank escrow account and transferred records showing clean funds available should I ever sell. I also did research and uncovered something else. The land had access to a small creek and a right-of-way that, once formalized, significantly raised its marketability. I hired a surveyor, filed the paperwork, and made sure everything was recorded properly. Each seemingly small step added real, legal, and financial worth to the property. All the while I kept up appearances with Claudette. I let her believe it was nothing. I dropped casual comments like, "It's just an old place upstate," and watched her fold it into the collection of things she could dismiss. That false confidence in her mind would be important later. When everything was in place, I prepared the final piece, a small, neatly wrapped box. Inside, along with the deed to the cabin, I placed copies of the appraisal, the survey, the inspection reports, and bank confirmations showing the property's current valuation and the escrow balance. I enclosed a simple letter explaining the legal transfer and the facts she could not deny. The deed would look plain, but the contents would do the damage. The box was meant to look like a modest, thoughtless present. The truth inside would speak louder than any speech I could give. A year slipped by faster than I expected, and before I knew it, Christmas had returned. This time, though, I walked into my mother's house with my head held high. The lights twinkled on the tree, the table was laid with the same food, the same fine china, the same faces pretending to be the perfect family. But I was different. I carried with me not shame, not tears, but a quiet kind of confidence. Claudette hadn't changed a bit. She still sat at the head of the table, wearing her pearls like a crown, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. She talked about her new coat, her investments, how proud she was of Marcus for his ambition. Though no one could name a single job he'd kept all year. Marcus lounged beside her, grinning, tossing little jabs at me. "So, Naomi," he said with a smirk, "still feeling left out of the family plans? Must be tough knowing you're not in the will. Don't worry, though, Mom and I will look after things." His laughter filled the room. A few relatives chuckled nervously, though some lowered their eyes, embarrassed. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, calm and steady, letting his words pass over me like smoke. "I actually brought a gift this year," I said lightly, my voice smooth. The chatter quieted, curious. Claudette's eyes narrowed, suspicious, but she held out her hand as I placed the small wrapped box in front of her. She peeled away the paper with the same air she used to open jewelry boxes, expecting something cheap, something beneath her. But when the lid came off, her face stiffened. Inside, neatly stacked, were documents. The deed to the South Carolina cabin, the official appraisal, inspection reports, and a cover letter confirming its ownership and value. The room fell silent as she shuffled through the papers. Her eyes flickered, widening with every page she turned. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice stripped of its usual control. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone even. "That's the cabin Dad left me. You probably remember it. Looks like nothing from the outside, doesn't it? But as you can see, it's worth more than 3 times this house. Market value confirmed. Everything is legally mine." Gasps rippled around the table. An uncle leaned forward to peek at the numbers. Cousins whispered to each other, and Aunt Lorraine covered her mouth, half shocked, half proud. Claudette's hands trembled as she clutched the papers, her lips pressed tight like she couldn't decide if she wanted to scream or cry. Marcus's smirk vanished. "That's not possible," he stammered. "Mom, tell her." But there was no denying it. The proof was there, stamped, signed, and official. For once, Claudette had no words. Her empire of control cracked in front of everyone, and I didn't have to raise my voice or beg for validation. I only smiled, letting the silence hang heavy. For the first time, my mother looked small, and I knew then that the gift had landed exactly the way I intended. Claudette sat frozen for a long moment, the papers trembling in her hands. Then, as if pulling herself together, she straightened her shoulders and forced a laugh. "Well, it's just an old cabin," she said lightly, her tone wobbling. "Not much to brag about. Sentimental, maybe, but nothing special." She pushed the box aside as though it were a trinket. But the room wasn't buying it. I caught the way my cousins leaned toward each other, whispering. I heard the word appraisal hissed across the table, followed by 3 times this house. My uncle muttered something under his breath, shaking his head. One by one, relatives looked at me differently, their eyes measuring, realizing that the daughter who was cast out now held the most valuable piece of the family's future. Marcus's face turned red. His jaw clenched, and then he slammed his hand on the table, making glasses rattle. Why didn't you tell us about this sooner? He snapped. You've been hiding it. You let everyone think you had nothing. His voice cracked, half rage, half panic. I kept my tone even calm, as though I had rehearsed it for years. Dad trusted me, I said softly, but firmly enough for the entire table to hear. He knew I never took advantage of him. That's why he left this to me quietly. It wasn't about bragging, Marcus. It was about respect. The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus's fists curled on the table, his eyes darting to our mother, desperate for backup. But Claudette's mask was slipping. The whispers around the room only grew louder, and I saw the flush of humiliation spread across her neck. For once, she wasn't the woman in control. She was the one being judged. Then Aunt Lorraine, who had always been the only one to show me kindness, spoke up. She leaned forward, her voice clear. Naomi is right. Your father must have known she was the responsible one. And looking at those numbers, it's clear he was wise to do it. That cabin is the real inheritance. She gave me a small smile, a quiet show of support in a room where I had always stood alone. I felt something shift in the air. The balance of power had tipped. No longer was I the forgotten daughter, the one erased from my mother's will. In the eyes of the family, I was now the true heir, the one my father had believed in when no one else did. Claudette's eyes darted around the table, searching for an ally, but all she found were murmurs and sidelong glances. Her carefully built image cracked in front of everyone, and there was nothing she could do to patch it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply sat there, calm and steady, letting the weight of the truth settle into the room. For the first time in my life, my mother was the one left small, and I didn't have to lift a finger to make it happen. The moment the whispers around the table grew louder, Claudette shifted her tone. The false laugh she used to cover her shock was gone, replaced with a shaky sweetness that never belonged to her. She reached across the table toward me, her pearls catching the light. Naomi, darling, she said softly, you know your mother has always looked out for you. Maybe you could share some of that property value with the family. Think of my medical bills, the house upkeep. I've sacrificed so much for you both. Her voice cracked, playing the role of a weary mother. I didn't flinch. I met her eyes and spoke clearly, so everyone heard. You made your choice when you cut me out. That was your decision, not mine. And now, I'm making mine. Her face stiffened, the sweetness slipping. For the first time in my life, I watched her realize that her control over me had vanished. Marcus, who had been pacing in his chair like a caged animal, suddenly leaned forward, desperation dripping from his words. Naomi, come on, don't do this. You know I need help. Just a little money, a loan even. I'll pay you back, I swear. He looked pitiful, his bravado gone. I thought back to the Christmas before, when he had smirked at me, mocking me for being left out. I remembered his laughter, sharp and cruel, echoing in my ears. I leaned closer, keeping my voice low but steady. Do you remember last year, Marcus? When you laughed at me for being cut out? When you thought it was funny that I had nothing? His face fell, his lips parting like he wanted to argue but couldn't. Now you're the one asking me for help. And the answer is no. The silence that followed was thicker than before. My relatives, who had once avoided my humiliation, were now watching every move. Some shook their heads at Claudette, others at Marcus. Aunt Lorraine crossed her arms and said firmly, It isn't Naomi's job to fix the mess you two made. She earned her respect, and you both lost yours. Claudette's cheeks flushed crimson. Marcus's shoulders slumped, his eyes darting anywhere but at me. For the first time, the family didn't rally around them. The image of Marcus as the golden boy cracked, and the illusion of Claudette's authority shattered. I sat back in my chair, calm. I didn't need to raise my voice or list all the sacrifices I had made. The truth was laid bare in front of everyone, and their reactions spoke louder than any defense I could give. For years, I had been the shadow at that table, the one overlooked, dismissed, humiliated. Now, the weight of their stares wasn't on me anymore. It was on them. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, vindicated. My father's trust, the cabin, the truth, all of it had brought me here. And finally, they were the ones left to face themselves. Naomi didn't hesitate once the papers were signed. The cabin in South Carolina, once thought of as an old relic with no value, sold for more than she had ever dreamed. With the proceeds, she found a beautiful house not far from her old neighborhood in Charlotte. It wasn't flashy, but it was hers, warm, inviting, and filled with the quiet peace she had long craved. For the first time, she felt like she had carved out a life on her own terms, free from the shadow of her mother's control. Meanwhile, word trickled back to her through Aunt Lorraine about Claudette and Marcus. Their fortune wasn't what it once was. Claudette's health was slipping, her medical bills stacking higher each month. The jewelry and savings she had once boasted about barely covered the costs, and Marcus, spoiled and entitled as ever, struggled to keep up his lifestyle without Naomi's quiet financial support behind the scenes. The family who had looked untouchable the Christmas before now teetered on the edge of collapse. Naomi didn't gloat publicly, didn't rub their faces in the mess they'd made. She didn't need to. Their downfall was loud enough without her saying a word. Yet as Christmas drew near again, she felt a spark of inspiration. Revenge wasn't always about shouting the last word. Sometimes, it was about delivering a reminder sharp enough to pierce the silence. So Naomi sat at her kitchen table one evening and carefully penned a Christmas card. She slid a glossy photo inside, a picture of her standing proudly in front of her new home, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled in years. On the opposite side, in her neat handwriting, she wrote only one line. "Merry Christmas, from the daughter you thought wasn't worth including." She sealed the envelope and sent it off, knowing exactly what kind of impact it would have. Claudette would open it, expecting perhaps a gesture of forgiveness, a softening of the coldness that had grown between them. Instead, she'd find the undeniable truth: Naomi had won. The act wasn't about cruelty, Naomi realized, but closure. For years, she had bent herself trying to earn her mother's love, trying to prove her worth in a house where she was always second best. That single card flipped the story. It was no longer Naomi begging for inclusion. It was Claudette left staring at the life her daughter built without her. As the holiday lights twinkled outside her window, Naomi sipped her tea and let the peace sink in. She no longer felt the sting of betrayal pressing against her chest. She didn't feel small or overlooked. She felt whole. Her revenge had never been about destruction. It was about reclaiming her dignity, proving to herself, and to everyone else, that she was more than enough. And with that final Christmas gift, she knew the chapter was finally closed. Do you believe Naomi was right to cut her mother and brother off for good, or should she have given them another chance? Share your thoughts down in the comments. I'd really love to hear them. And if you enjoy powerful stories like this one, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss the next upload.